What's up, everybody? I'm Anne Richmond, aka Hearthsinger, the head bard in charge around these parts, and these days there are a million amazing TTRPG actual plays to enjoy. And while your game may not look like any of them, as a TTRPG performer myself, being a part of these kinds of productions has fundamentally changed the way I storytell at my table. Critical Role, Dimension 20, Dungeons and Daddies, Dungeons and Drag Queens, Friends at the Table, The Adventure Zone, Goblets and Gaze. There are folks that spend years honing their skills in improvisation and pacing and just general storytelling to bring fans the tales they enjoy from week to week. And I want to tell you what some of my biggest takeaways have been and what I've done to take them from a performance perspective and bring them into every game I play, even the ones I play behind closed doors. I'm going to start out with my biggest secret. You want to keep people on the hook and interested in your game, excited to come back from week to week? Something exciting has to happen every 90 minutes. Where does this come from? When I'm building a game for a show or a session that's going to be recorded for a podcast, I'm thinking about a finished product that's got to be anywhere from 45, if it's being edited down for a podcast with post-production, to an hour and 30 minutes for something that's going to be live streamed. And something exciting has to happen right at the end. Now, do you have to try and do a cliffhanger every time? No. But these are the types of things that you need to be looking for. You're like a composer. You're trying to create a rise and fall of action that is exciting and keeps people invested. Therefore, you need to make sure that by the end of 90 minutes, your players are either in trouble, they've made an interesting discovery, or they've experienced a dramatic change in setting or environment, or they've met someone who has changed the way that they have thought about the adventure previously, or the way that they think about someone else at the table. Doing this should not feel like you are keeping players on the rails. In fact, getting good at this is actually about listening to your players. Figure out what they are interested in, what they are invested in, and figure out hooks to lay down in front of them at the appropriate time. And get them excited to, take their break and then come back ready to go, either for the second half of the session or in a week when it's time to go again. Don't be afraid of stopping mid-conversation if you stop at an interesting beat change. Don't be afraid of stopping just before violence breaks out. And the best part is, if you get really good at this, you will never have trouble scheduling a follow-up session again. While you can absolutely start tossing this skill into a campaign you're already running, I think the best way of practicing it and sort of shaping the rise and fall of an adventure arc with these sort of cliffies interspersed within it is to start planning for 5 to 10 session adventure arcs. So whether that's a full adventure that happens within that period or just, a particular arc within your story, I think that helps you really sort of gain a sense of how long these types of things should take. It's not a perfect science, but I think when you're looking for an example, like Exandria Unlimited is a really good one, especially Calamity, and also Dimension 20. All of their DMs are kind of masters at this. And of course, take this with a grain of salt. Dimension 20 is extremely edited and has a lot of post-production, and the same even with the podcast, like my Lost Mountain Saga show that I'm on with two of my friends. And ultimately this is about figuring out what works for you. So practice it, and if it improves your game, then great. And if not, here are some other things that hopefully will. Next tip, not every battle or challenge requires a map. Yes, it's nice to see what is happening in physical space, but if you need to keep moving on those 90-minute turnarounds, sometimes you got to move through something fast, and you want to keep skill challenges or some combat exciting. And if you're constantly stopping to break down every single action and count squares on the board, that starts adding time to your game very quickly. If you want a scuffle that's going to last about 30 minutes instead of an hour plus, then theater of the mind is your friend in a few very particular situations. Firstly, you have to think of it like it's a podcast. You can't take it for granted that what you think people are hearing is exactly what you're seeing in your head. You need to talk about environment, the amount of space that's being taken up by the map that you're seeing in your head. Is the room 30 feet across and 20 feet wide? Where are the doors? Are there any important features like desks or barrels or dark areas in the room? Like, what's the lighting like? You need to be able to describe this as you set up what the characters are seeing at the top of the battle, but you also should be open to encouraging your players to ask questions and invent elements of the environment themselves. I.e., so we're in an artificer shop, right? Well, yeah. What do you want to look for? Is there any gunpowder? Well, yes, and there is gunpowder. It's in the corner next to the pair of bandits facing off against the monk. So keep in mind, you can shoot that gunpowder, but there may be repercussions for the monk. I'll allow them to use a dex save to try and jump out of the way. The bandits will get to make that same save, and if they fail, let's set the DC at 13, and if everybody fails, they'll take 4d6 damage and half if they succeed. So you can kind of make up those mechanics. You don't need to go looking in the book for every single thing, but look for, if you wanted to do gunpowder, maybe even like try using a fireball as a template for the type of damage or the type of save you're going to do. Think on your feet, but also be open to adapting and letting people interpret the environment that you're all building together in your minds. The other thing to use as a limitation is I like to think about how many enemies they're facing off against in a particular space. So theater of the mind works best for me in like a 30 by 30 room with 5 or less enemies. I say this because within a small environment like that with a limited number of enemies, I can kind of wrap my mind around what's happening for the entire sort of layout of that combat session, and anyone who's in that room is likely to have access to anyone else. The only sticky thing you have to think about are what kind of statuses are affecting everyone in that room, and if somebody moves away from another enemy, what attacks of opportunity are they incurring. And the other thing you want to think about is if it's larger than that or has more enemies and is more complicated, then yeah, you probably do want to lay out a map, even if it's just a simple piece of graph paper where people can, draw with pencil or rip off pieces of paper to mark off where they are, and do your best to keep track of it. It doesn't always have to be like a huge dwarven forge setup with, tiered layers of an entire tavern. Like it's just not necessary. Save those moments for the big moments. And let the simpler things be simpler. The other thing that you want to consider is there are a couple of classes that can be kind of negatively impacted by not being able to see all of their environment. Monk and rogue kind of come to mind because monks are able to get so many places so quickly and deliver all sorts of different sort of bonus action elements, and it's the same with rogues. Like they need to know where they can bonus action hide, how far they can dash, and just how much they're going to be able to accomplish with those abilities that are really intrinsic to the value of their place in the party. Next up, dreams and flashbacks are my bread and butter, baby. And by that, I mean that they're such a great way to see an amazing scene from somebody's backstory that they have already shown a passion for and interest in from what they've sent me before the game, and get them to, share it with the rest of the table. We often, I will like clam up when it's time to like share my cool trauma from my backstory, and then I'll be like, oh man, I could have done that better, or I didn't say the right thing, or I forgot this cool detail that I would have liked to share. But if I can provide a platform for my players to be able to share that stuff and sort of help them through it, I think sometimes it can be a little more satisfying. And Sometimes it's a great way to introduce a character, even though you're not going to use that meta knowledge, as another player at the table. It's a cool way to introduce a character at the top of the story, or if you're doing a flashback, let's say, we're seeing somebody as like a hardened criminal these days, but we flash back and we see a moment from their childhood, like maybe a time that started moving them down that path, or something that like lives in that multi-dimensional dichotomy that is so different from the person we see now. It's really fun to have those sort of, like Lost or Once Upon a Time style flashbacks in your game for that reason. If you are someone who finds that you have trouble getting people to invest in the story at the table, throwing them an idea that was theirs to begin with is a pretty easy win. Here are some good examples of that. Remember your jealous sibling who thought that they should be the heir to the family fortune? Turns out they also have a pact with your warlock patron. Or maybe the rogue discovers that the mercenary they just assassinated has a tattoo on their forearm that matches their own, a symbol from a cult they escaped as a child. The key here, if you want people to pay attention to your story as a DM, first you gotta pay attention to theirs. And lastly, one of the biggest things I've learned from being a part of the TTRPG performance community is to release yourself from being perfect. Nothing is ever going to measure up to these highly edited shows. Like when I think about how I run my private D&D game versus how the episodes sound from the arc I've been running for Lost Mountain Saga, or when I think about, the amazing editing on the balance arc of the Adventure Zone. Like, I don't need to hold myself to that standard, and neither do you. So you can absolutely take some of these lessons and work them in when they work for you, and then release yourself from, having to be Matthew Mercer. Like, Matthew Mercer would be the first to tell you it's your table, it's your game, make it your own. If you need to look something up, do it. Take a bathroom break and run to the other room and come up with an idea. I literally just did this during a recording for Lost Mountain. I said, everybody take a bathroom break. I have a really cool idea. I'm not ready to run it, but I know we need to do another session. So just take a second. I'm going to come up with something really cool. When they came back to the table, I asked everybody like a couple confirming questions about their backstory. And then I confirmed that something that I wanted to sort of like zhuzh to make everybody's backstory kind of connect was okay with them. And then we moved forward from there. Like once I had consent and had like adjusted everything, like I took that time and then we all had a blasty blast. So you can still learn from your favorite shows and your favorite players without having to force the finished product to look the same. So I want to know, what are some of the key takeaways that you've yoinked from actual plays and shoved into your home games? Tell me in the comments below. And hey, if you liked the video, give me a like, subscribe, and come back for more right here on Heartsinger Games. And in the meantime, get out there and live your quest life. Bye! Wow. I really enjoyed making this video, but the truth hurts because being a content creator in this space is the pain of knowing that as soon as I said the words Critical Role, a million butthurt nerds didn't even stick around to hear about anything I had to say. So hey, if you made it to the post-credit scenes and you're hearing this and you did take the time to give it a chance, thanks. And I'm so glad you guys stayed to watch and hang out.